Good morning, Warhawks. I'm Joey, and today is Wednesday, February 24th. This is WTN News. Thanks for tuning in. Today is Chick-fil-A Day. Go grab yours from B Hall before it's gone. Congratulations to our girls and boys tennis teams for their wins yesterday against Largo. We want to congratulate and send our best wishes to our own Miss Patterson, who was just appointed to the principal position at Palm Harbor University High School. We will miss you. Our Black History highlight for today is about Rebecca Lee. In 1864, Rebecca Lee became the New England Female Medical College's only African-American graduate. The school closed its doors in 1873. A few statistics help put her remarkable achievement in perspective. In 1860, there were only 300 women out of 54,543 physicians in the United States, and none of them were African American. She had medical practices in Boston, Massachusetts, and Richmond, Virginia. She died in 1895. Juniors and seniors, there is a virtual college fair today. It's from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. The college fair will showcase nearly 50 colleges, universities, and post-high school programs. You will have the opportunity to explore the colleges, to learn about admission requirements, and what you need to prepare for college. You can join the virtual college fair by going to www.pcsb.org/collegefairs. Today is the deadline. Don't forget, homecoming week is set for March 8th through 12th. If you are interested in nominating someone for homecoming court, the paperwork can be picked up in Mr. Scales' room B3 and is due today. There will be FSA retakes in the Media Center today. As we close our show today, we are going to turn it over to Rho Kappa. Thank you for watching WTN News and have a great day, Warhawks. Here are Rho Kappa members Dara Cadzo and Tori Foltz with more on Black History Month.
Hello, my name is Dara.
And I'm Tori.
We are members of Rho Kappa National Social Studies Honor Society. Last week, our fellow Rho Kappa members shared some information about the new African American History Trail in the area known as Deuces Live in St. Petersburg.
This week, we are turning our attention to Clearwater and some local African American history that is unfolding there right now. This story is about an unnamed African American cemetery, known today as the North Greenwood Cemetery, that spanned an area along what is currently Holt Avenue in Clearwater. That's about 12 miles north of where we are right now.
The use of that location as a cemetery dates back to the 1940s and the early 1950s. By some accounts, the cemetery's graves had been relocated to another cemetery near Dunedin in 1954.
The Clearwater/Upper Pinellas branch of the NAACP, in conjunction with the Clearwater Heights Remembrance Committee, requested an investigation into the relocation of North Greenwood Cemetery because there had been local stories that some of the graves were still there.
The city of Clearwater contracted with an engineering firm named Cardno to investigate the property. Cardno, along with the Florida Public Archaeology Network, used ground-penetrating radar to survey the area and have now completed 2 phases of that work.
Findings from the radar suggest several burials do remain in their original locations at the North Greenwood Cemetery site. Based on these results, Cardno recommended the project area undergo a minimally invasive archaeological excavation project to verify the ground-penetrating radar results.
In early February, the fieldwork, also known as ground truthing and excavation, occurred at the site. Last Friday, Pinellas County Schools held a live question and answer session with several key people involved in this ongoing investigation.
Now we would like to share with you the recording of one of those sessions. If you have any questions about the North Greenwood Cemetery or the work shown in the video, please email them to Ms. Russo at russode@pcsb.org.
Welcome to our North Greenwood Greenwood Cemetery live Q&A. My name is Matthew Bloom, and I'm the high school social studies content specialist, and I'll be your host today. I'm alone in the room, so I have my mask off, so hopefully you can hear me better. And we're joined today by an amazing panel of people joining us virtually who are going to help us answer some questions that you all have about the work that's been done on the North Greenwood Cemetery site. I'd like to introduce each of our guests and ask them to tell us a little bit about the work that they do. First is Mr. Jeffrey T. Moats. Mr. Moats, welcome.
Sorry. Okay, I'm unmuted now. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me here. My name's Jeff Moats. I'm an archaeologist. I work at the University of South Florida, and I run an office that's called the Florida Public archaeology network, and we do a lot of community-based archaeology where we're working with local schools to provide education outreach and work with local communities and local governments to help with management stuff and go take a look at archaeological sites. So that's what we do on a regular basis. And sometimes we get to work with private companies like Cardno and other companies in the area and get to help them out on a lot of the projects that they undertake as well.
Thank you for being with us. We also have Miss Erin McKendry. Hi, Erin.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for inviting me to join today. Just like Jeff, I am also an archaeologist. I work for a company called Cardno in the Cultural Resources department. And we work on a lot of different kinds of projects, whether it's developments for residents or commercial, pipelines, solar farms, what have you. We go in and we do, we check and we work on the cultural resources that might be present on those properties before any development begins. And sometimes we work on projects like the North Greenwood Cemetery, investigating those sorts of sites as well.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Mr. Zebedee Atkinson IV. Mr. Atkinson, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Oh, yeah. I'm Zeb Atkinson. I'm the president of the Clearwater Upper Pinellas County branch of the NAACP, which is the largest and oldest, most respected civil rights organization in the United States.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you all for joining us today. Our students have sent in some questions that we're going to get to in a moment. First, we want to start with an introductory video. An unnamed African-American cemetery known today as the North Greenwood Cemetery in Clearwater dates its usage back to 1940 to about the mid-1950s. Recently, the Clearwater Upper Pinellas branch of the NAACP, in conjunction with the Clearwater Heights Remembrance Committee, requested an investigation into the outcome of a supposed 1954 relocation of the cemetery. Earlier this month, the archaeological fieldwork known as ground truthing took place on site. Let's watch a brief video that includes a little bit of the history of the location and the work that has taken place there so far.
You need to know your history before you can start moving forward.
1940, the city opened up a cemetery for use with the African American community at this location.
Back in the early 50s, there was a Negro pool that the city of Clearwater wanted to get put in.
So there was a decision that was made to relocate the burials at the cemetery in 1954.
They thought, they were doing was clearing all the bodies away from here. So they went ahead and did that, put the pool in. Then the school system, later on, several years later, wanted to put a school here, and again went to the city, asked that the bodies be removed. I guess they did the best they could to try and remove them, but some were left.
Burials were not moved because they just weren't visible at the time. Some had headstones, some had grave markings that were above ground. Some had they're kind of temporary nameplates. We actually found one of them in the ground. That gives us a lot of clues to follow here.
The NAACP reached out to USF, Jeff Moats, and his archaeology department, and they were able to do ground penetrating radar.
And that'll show us just kind of objects or differences in the soil that look like a cemetery. You're in a cemetery, you're gonna see, some patterns appear in some of that data as it's recovered. We're pulling it out of the position that it was in that ground. So we're kind of removing it from its location. Part of the objectives, not just to kind of find the boundaries or the extent of the cemetery, but also is determine how many or where there might be some burials that are still remaining.
This is an area where we want to figure out if there are graves or coffins that are actually below the surface.
This type of work is really rewarding for us because we're getting to be part of truth finding.
Keeping everything in place giving as much information to the community and to the property managers that we can do. We do find, in a lot of ways, important pieces that were left behind with those individuals who are buried here. We have so many community members coming by and just, imparting their stories and their memories of this place, which lends itself to, learning about these local communities and then kind of attaching that to the broader themes of what was going on in the 1950s and the 1960s.
It is important to understand in this particular instance how communities get overlooked. Those type of things hopefully will come to an end soon, and the sooner that we all, look back at our history, realize the relevance, then we can move forward.
So we've been receiving a lot of questions from the students and the teachers who have been watching, and I wanted to present a few of those to our panel. And so, Mr. Atkinson, one of the most common questions that we're getting is, how does something like this happen? How does a cemetery get erased, and then how is it rediscovered?
Cemeteries like this typically get erased or moved because someone else wants the property to do something else with. They want to be what's deemed at the time as more progressive. So it may even be due through, the students will probably understand redlining when they start looking back at their early civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s. There is a piece of property, in this case a cemetery, that is more desirable to have a school on or a pool on or a residence. Those people get taxed out of their area where they live, and then developers can come in and build houses on it. The important thing is that the community members that still are in the area still have some memories of that area, and they're able to recant that. Typically with African American people, it's through the tradition of storytelling, and that's passing down a story from one generation to the next generation. This particular generation in North Greenwood just happened to recant the story to the Remembrance Committee, and they were just trying to, get their old neighbors together for a cookout, and they started talking about the things that they remembered. They went to the Clearwater Historical Society, and they did as much research as they could do, and then they reached out to the NAACP, who reached out to USF and Jeff Moats, and then it went up to the city of Clearwater to get involved, and they got Cardinal, who is their contractor of record, involved to get to the point where we were last week with ground truthing.
Thank you. And Mr. Moats, another popular question from the students is, how big was the original cemetery? The original number of graves. How many were you able to confirm during your work, and how many of the original number were not moved?
That's a really good question, and I'll ask Erin to fill in any details that I miss, so she can kind of follow up or take this answer as well, but I'll give it a shot. So Erin can probably provide you with the total acreage of the cemetery, but what we know through historical documents is that during the process of removal, when the decision was made to remove the interred bodies from the cemetery to another location, supposedly there was 356 that were moved, or that should have been moved. The contractor who was paid to remove those bodies was paid for the removal of 356. We don't know the exact count of death certificates or people who were actually interred there yet. Historical research is still ongoing. So that's the number that we've been going on. And as we conducted the ground penetrating radar survey and Cardno as well, we determined that there's likely 54 burials that were still out there. And that was just in the areas that we surveyed. We didn't survey the entire acreage of the original boundaries of the cemetery. So 54 identified in the ground penetrating radar. Then during the ground truthing process, Aaron, do I have the number correct? I think we confirmed 29 of those, 25 or 29.
29.
29.
Mm-hmm.
And then of those, we confirmed in that there were burials intact in those graves. We confirmed a couple of those. So there's a large number of people still buried out at North Greenwood, I think is the takeaway. But Aaron, you could fill in some of the holes.
Sure, I think you actually covered it really well. As far as acreage, it's the estimated cemetery included 1.5 acres of land. And during our ground penetrating radar, as Jeff said, we were able to locate 55 anomalies through that. It showed up in the imagery that we collect and analyze after the GPR survey. And then of those, with our excavation that took place over the course of 2 weeks in the smaller areas that we opened up to look for those burial shafts, we did identify 29 burial shafts.
Thank you. The students are also interested, Ms. McKendry and Mr. Motes, they're interested in, the video mentioned other objects were found in the process. What other types of objects were found, and then what's going to happen to them as far as cataloging or studying or researching the history of? What happens to those?
For this particular project, no artifacts, nothing was taken away from the site. We were investigating the presence or absence of these burials. We were not interested in disturbing the burials any more than was necessary to confirm that they were present. So everything that was identified was cataloged, recorded, photographed, what have you, and was returned back to the location, or as close to the location as possible where it was retrieved from the work. We did have some interesting finds. We located, I believe, 2 dimes and a penny on the property that were in association with some of those burial shafts. The penny had a 1944 date on it, and I believe the dime was in 1942. So that fits within the active time frame of the cemetery. It was an interesting find. Coins, of course, throughout human history have had some linkage to burial sites and usage and different rituals or customs. So it'll be interesting to look into that a little further as how that might apply. I know some of the theories were being discussed out at the site that perhaps the funeral homes had gone ahead and left them there. So that'll be an interesting thing to follow through and do a little additional research as to what sort of connection there might be with that. Probably one of the most significant finds was the marker, the burial marker that had the name of an individual who was interred there when it was an active cemetery. And I believe that there's certainly in the video there was a picture of it. So it was pretty significant because up to this point we hadn't had any confirmed names of individuals who were buried there.
Yeah, if I can, Matt, real quick, just to add on to what Aaron was saying, the individual whose name was on that nameplate and that marker was William Ridley. And really quickly, the historians at Cardno were able to find Mr. Ridley's obituary. And, in the video, it says, this will give us, a lot of clues to follow. And really, the name of an individual, finding the obituary is so important because, as you mentioned, Matt, this cemetery is heretofore kind of unnamed. And so it takes on the name of North Greenwood. But in that obituary for Mr. Ridley, it says that he was buried in a cemetery in Clearwater called Rosemary. And since then, that gave another clue for historians to begin to track down. So, at the end of this, we might have a name or a couple of names that the community may have referred to this particular cemetery as, which is great because that will allow, for the research to continue to try to identify as many individuals as possible who were buried there.
Thank you both. Mr. Atkinson, what's been the community reaction after the confirmation of the burial still present at the site. What are the feelings or reactions or things that you're hearing about this kind of rediscovery of this cemetery, the re-acknowledgement of this cemetery?
Well, the community is glad that the work has been done and that there's finally, answers to questions that they've had for so long. Like I said, there are people that are in their 60s now that can tell you stories about when they were playing in that area and people told them don't play. Or Mr. O'Neill has to be in his 80s and he remembers, hunting over in that area when he was a little kid. So it answers a lot of questions, and the community now has a larger question to answer, and that is, based on the findings, what would you like to see happen with this area now? How would you like to memorialize it, or would you like to memorialize it? So those are the kind of questions that we'll be putting to the community, and then going forward, talking with the city and the property managers about that.
Thank you. One of the some of the questions that are coming in are based around the technology that was being used and some of the things that we saw to be able to identify these remains and these graves. And so in our next video, we wanted to expand that view of the work at North Greenwood Cemetery through the lens of technology. And we wanted to take a look at how technology is supporting the rediscovery of the cemetery and also how it's expanding the role of archaeologists in society.
The archaeological discovery process always lends itself to just, exceptional educational opportunities to talk about kind of radar and radar waves and sonar and that sort of stuff, and its application in archaeology and even its application in daily life, because ground penetrating radar is used to find utilities and foundations and all sorts of stuff. The ground penetrating radar is a radar machine that shoots energy waves into the ground, and then they bounce back based on, kind of what they're going up against. We apply it to help us kind of get to the next step of, okay, what are the best places for us to conduct excavation? So we minimize damage, or we minimize that destruction. So it's a useful tool for archaeologists in that way. We're taking shovels to try to further identify those past disturbances or those grave shafts, and then we'll start the documentation process, and we use lots of different elements to do that. Photography is one way to document, also hand-drawn sketch maps of what we're looking at, and then we bring in some of the sort of technical equipment, GPS devices, and then total stations to give us more detailed and refined mapping of the operation areas that we open up. From that point, the archaeologists will kind of put their heads together and figure out that where they want to test excavate, so where they want to place a test unit. Part of the objectives, not just to kind of find the boundaries or the extent of the cemetery, but also is determine what's the likelihood that everything we're seeing in the ground is an intact burial, and what's the likelihood that some of these are probably the results, some of these grave shafts or these disturbances are the results of that relocation process. To become an archaeologist, you've really got to have kind of a feel for a lot of those technical aspects, but then also able to really have a feel for doing research. What's great about archaeology is connecting that to the community today and providing these services to answer questions like this. There was a graveyard out here. Is it still here? Where is it located?
It puts a community's mind at ease. They, instead of hearing the stories, now they have concrete information of either, yes, there are bodies still here, or no, they're not.